So we'll get started. It's 5 o'clock. Turn it over to.
Do you want to do anything with the minutes first?
Oh, yeah, after we approve the minutes, I'll entertain a motion.
To approve the minutes from December.
JP, I just had one thing looking at the minutes.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask a question. We talked about adding the music auxiliary as a committee to the list of committees that we deal with, and we decided to let that go through the DPO. And I just wondered if they can do that yet or not.
I don't know that, Charlie, if they've added a music auxiliary person or not.
Wonder if we could follow up.
Yeah, I can definitely do that, sure.
There was someone at the last meeting from the music auxiliary. Yeah,
I really remember that. I just don't remember specifically.
they filled out early, but at the DPO meeting was, they're just struggling with participation. And not for lack of trying. I'm not saying that's them per se.
Yeah, and of course it's encouraging to the auxiliary some great participation.
So Matt, you'll follow up on that.
Yeah, I'll follow up, yep.
Thank you.
All right, anything else on the minutes? Then we're ready for a vote.
Do we have a second? Did Charlie second it?
Oh, no, you didn't, sorry.
I will second it.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now I'll turn it over to Matt on appendix 9.
All right, well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. You can see we have quite a few team members here this evening. We wanted to spend some time talking to you about Appendix 9 that is always on the consent agenda that deals with our facility projects. And I think just a couple things from the onset, as we've taken on a large number of facility projects, this was a process that has kind of morphed and developed over a number of years in an effort to be transparent and to make sure that we were really including all the information on those projects. It's a multi-step process. We're going to try to share some of the history with you tonight and why it's evolved the way it has. I do think, just based on some feedback I've gotten from different members of the board, that sometimes in an effort to be so transparent and include so much information, that it's also easy for information to get lost because that packet is really large different times, especially with the number of projects we've been having. So I think as far as outcomes tonight, we'd want you to feel like you understand the process about why things end up where they are on Appendix 9 and when they get presented that way, or why even two different projects might have some of those steps compressed and look like they're together, and some other projects move through that in a more traditional standpoint. And then finally, if you'd have any feedback or things you'd like to see different, or any different way for us to approach it. I know sometimes we've talked about pulling certain items out of Appendix 9 to kind of have a standalone item in the board meeting, and that was something I wanted to continue to get feedback from you guys on, because it becomes rather subjective about when, how do we make a decision about when to pull something out and when to leave, everything as a whole package. So this is a starting point for the conversation. If we need to come back to this one because we either run out of time or you guys want some time to think about it or discuss further, that's perfectly okay too. But we have Dwayne with us tonight, Michelle, Jeff, all from the facilities team, because I think Chase and I learned quite a bit as we were going through this too, just about, okay, how this has happened and why we've ended up where we were at today. So with that, I think Chase is going to start us off, and then we'll just kind of see where we go.
You exhausted everything.
Did I take all your words?
That's all I had planned to say. No, good evening, everyone. Nice to be with you. Sorry, this kind of fell asleep. Let me pull this back up real quick. As Matt said, we have some of our experts here, and Michelle, Jeff, and Dwayne. And Michelle's really responsible for doing this work around Appendix 9, meeting in and meeting out. So she is our go-to person, and we appreciate her keeping all these different pieces straight for us. And when I won't say if, when I misspeak, jump in and correct me, because we know you know it better than anyone. And we keep saying Appendix 9, you're like, well, Chase, why are you showing me this policy? Because actually, this is what Appendix 9 is in our board policy. And so we're going to come back to that, but if you were wondering why we have that up there, that is the case. But thanks to Kim and Michelle, here's a little bit of the history on Appendix 9. For a long time, for almost 2 decades, the district operated under a mode of governance called Carver governance model rather than the traditional policy model we have now. I think Ruthina was the only member of the board, currently on the board, that was there at the time. Thank you for the help then to move us away to that, to back to the more traditional model. This is much more robustly captures what we do as a district. Molly and JP, you were here as staff members under the Carver.
I can't.
Oh, you were on the board? I can't remember when. I mean, okay, I apologize. You were on. See, I leave when I come back. Yeah. Now, will you be on next? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So JP and Ruthina helped move us back from this model, and as part of the Carver governance model, we had these appendices. You might have also heard of Appendix 6. Appendix 6 was the general complaint process, which you all helped us change into policy 107.R1 just 2 years ago. And so we have tried to take some of those things that we're working and move them forward. Just so happened Appendix 9 is where we capture all of our construction projects. And so you see there on the screen how we kind of have morphed it over the last couple decades, as we talked about, literally from the year 2000 to our last revision in 2022, as we changed it from Appendix 9 to Policy 707.5G1. And as Matt said, really when you started to do this work, the dates shouldn't be surprising. You see a lot of changes in the 2010 and then 2014, about the time that FMP 1.0 came on to being. And so as we picked up more projects, we had more things in the pipeline for the board. The board agendas were getting extremely long, so we're trying to find a way to package it that got things through the approval in a timely manner, but also gave the board what they needed. And Matt talked about it was in terms of trying to be transparent, but what we also know is that in doing that, it can sometimes appear that maybe we haven't talked to you all about something for a long time and then it comes back up. One of the examples we're going to show later today that we're actually working on right now, including the modulars and the work at Southeast, the board actually approved for the first time back in 2022. Because the first step in the FFP process is when you all approve the projects, or excuse me, in the Appendix 9 process is when you approve the project as part of FMP 2.0. And so, as I said, when the examples will go through, you all approved FMP 2.0, that timeline with all the different color bars back in April of 2022. And then in May is the first time the projects at Southeast Junior High actually showed up as part of Appendix 9 in Step 1. And so fast forward 2 years, and then you see, and we'll show it here in a minute, a number of the different steps come back in front of the board. And so it's a elongated process, or it can be very condensed. But we felt like it was important, as Matt said, to have that conversation and the work that we were doing. Questions about kind of the history on it? Okay, so back to the policy. And the policy really, we lay out the different steps. I mentioned there, number one, the facility master plan. And that is that update we provide you. Again, this is timely because Dwayne's going to come back and join us in June. And we're going to provide an update to FMP 2.0. I think that's first is a discussion. I think it's still to be determined whether or not they're going to put it back on the board agenda for another round of approval. But we'll bring back another update on that. So then you see authorization to begin the design project, followed by schematic design, and then project design development. Those are things that we sometimes do together, sometimes do separately, depending on the scope of the project. And while together or separate, that doesn't necessarily mean we make a presentation. It just means they'll show up in the Appendix 9 packet together. One you will notice, though, is number 6, the public hearing. That's always something that we see come up that we have to have that. That's an opportunity for the public to comment. And actually, I think one of the things that we haven't done, well, it's become so pro forma that we have a public hearing, especially because we haven't brought things other than just these construction projects. Sometimes the board isn't supposed to comment on that, but the vice president always reads, are there questions from the community? Are there questions from the board? It actually is a discussion item for the board, and because it's one of our major steps in FMP 2.0, it is a time that the board could discuss these projects at a piece where it's in front of the public. We just haven't really done that because we're so in the flow of the pieces that we do. It's not been a focal point. We bring back the bids for approval, and then as the project is underway, this can be a space where, again, it can go on for a long time between the time the construction actually starts there can be a number of pieces that come through contract modifications. Just guesstimate for me, Dwayne, when we did Liberty, how many, like,
Change orders,
change orders?
30 to 40.
So those would all come through at different pieces of the Appendix 9 process. And then following with substantial completion, and then, of course, the financial acceptance. This is a lot more than most districts do. Under state law, we simply have to follow the state bidding guidelines. And so it's pretty, for the amount of dollars that districts spend on construction, there are actually very few things that a board really has to step in and approve along the way. These are a number of things that we've added to make sure that we keep the public informed, keep the board informed, and allow you to be good stewards and good checks on us about the projects that we're doing and how we spend those dollars. But I think it circles back to the point that Matt made, is while we have this and we continue to do this, sometimes it can become a check the box process, especially like the example with Southeast. When F&P 2.0 was in front of you more than 2 years ago, Director Lingo wasn't even on the board at that point. Director Abraham wasn't even on the board at that point. And so then those things can just roll forward as part of Appendix 9. And so I think that's one of the things that we'd like to get your feedback as well. Are we hitting the mark with you in terms of when we're putting these pieces in front of you? Are there certain steps where we should pull them out of Appendix 9 to highlight them more, whether they're a standalone item on the consent agenda, or if we actually have them as a standalone action item to make sure that the board has an opportunity to get all the details that you need. Now, we try our best to try to pinpoint the ones that we think are going to generate conversation, but again, we don't always know. And so we have Appendix 9 as kind of a backdrop for that. Dwayne, Michelle, Jeff, anything you want to add in about the process that I haven't really touched on?
I was just going to add a couple comments. One, that Appendix 9 is also becoming a historical document. It's got a database attached to it that's huge. And you can literally go back and recreate facility master plan from day one, from when some of you saw that huge spreadsheet we put on the wall. You can go back and recreate that whole thing with Appendix 9 in the database. Not that it's important to this discussion, but it's important to realize that there was a lot of reasons for doing that. I think,
Go ahead.
well, I was going to say that back in 2012, 13, 14, we spent a lot of time rewriting Appendix 9 because it was kind of ambiguous. It talked about 25% design and 50% design. And it was, the board back then wanted to stay on top of the design process, but it didn't make any sense to me as a builder or to the architects. So we changed it to schematic design, design development, construction documents, because that's the process we go through when we design a building. So we modified that Appendix 9 at the time to do that, and we've pretty much used that ever since. But there are pieces of that don't have to be formally approved if you don't want to. I mean, if you want to streamline it, you can. There's some pieces of this that need contractually and legally be done. For example, a public hearing is a definite requirement. The advertising the bid date and acceptance of bids is a formal requirement. And even substantial completion is in Iowa Code 573, where it talks about when a project is declared substantially complete for warranty purposes, for payment purposes, for all the things that are attached to it in a contract. So there's reasons for why they're in there. And I think it's a good discussion to have is, do we need to continue to do this? Can you streamline it? Sure, but there may be a reason why some of it needs to stay. Enough said.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want us to repeat ourselves, but one of the things I would add is Matt and I have learned a lot, and I would add that when we first did this and going through and reviewing Appendix 9 all the time, I was like, this is a lot of stuff. I can't believe Michelle has to do this every 2 weeks. And I was like, look, the board's kind of asked us some questions. I think we have an opportunity to maybe look at doing something differently. And the team was basically like, no, we like Appendix 9. It's a lot of work, but I think for what Dwayne said, it provides that historical record and the steps all along the way. And so this isn't us coming to the board saying, hey, we need to do a different model, or we need to scale it back. With conversations with the team, we believe this does serve our purposes and provides us that documentation that we need. But we also want to make sure that it meets your needs as board members in making sure we're highlighting those projects at the same point. And it could be different. What we need to highlight when we are building a new comprehensive high school is probably different than what we need to highlight when we're resurfacing the parking lot at an elementary school. And so we also know that depending on the scope of the project, you might have a different idea of what pieces of that process you want us to separate out and to put together.
So you talk about the process, but we get into that process. So even when we do small parking lots, we use the process because that's what we're familiar with. And boards and the public always talk about transparency. There's nothing more transparent than Appendix 9 in that database. It's all there, every penny, so it's really there if somebody ever wants to question it. But it is truly transparent. But it can be lengthy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the issue.
Yeah, I get it.
It's a lot of information and
Yeah.
the public can't necessarily go through all of that.
Well, the part that Michelle does every time is the financial piece at the end. And there's pages and pages of expenditures and documents that don't make a lot of sense to you. A lot of that could be there if you want to see it. Now, we even got to the place where construction documents, we don't bring the huge plans to the board anymore, but they're down there. If you want to see them, they're at the physical plant. We would say that in the actual item, available at the physical plant. So there are ways to make it more streamlined, and maybe that financial page is a piece that we could do that with. But it's there if you want it, and if you want to ignore it and go on, that's fine too. But it's there.
Yeah, I think my concern with some of the things that have been in Appendix 9 is I just want to make sure that it's something that is new, that the public may like to comment on, that it is somewhere else on the agenda and not kind of tucked in
Yeah.
into a 50-page document where they might not see it. So, when it's something new that we're doing, such as the middle schools or Phase 2 or the Center for Innovation.
I love the comment, Jane, and one of the reasons it got kind of condensed in Appendix 9 on its own board item was so that you wouldn't have to look at it all. We tried to make it simpler by doing that, but
I guess it would be even just having like the first page with a summary of what is new to Appendix 9, such as we included changes to the middle school, or in here is a change to the plan at the Center for Innovation. And just so then people can be like, oh, that one trips my
instead of going through reams and reams of paper.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Almost like an overview sheet about what's in Appendix 9.
and it doesn't need to go into huge details, just like
Well, I think this is kind of a good example, right? Because what you're asking for technically happens, but if you don't know the policy we just talked about, you don't know what the steps mean, right? So you don't know what it means when it says that we're talking about the North Central Junior High Middle School Edition 1, 2, and 3. You don't know that means it's the first time it's coming onto the screen. And so I hear what you're saying. And so we have a summary page, but I think what I'm hearing you say is that rather than just using the numerical pieces, we need to make sure we highlight it the first time it's on there, and then kind of call out what it is and what we're doing at that piece of the process.
Yeah, because that is how the board approved the addition to the junior highs to create middle schools, was an item in Appendix 9. It wasn't a standalone issue on the board agenda. It was only in Appendix 9. And that's something that I want to prevent from happening again.
And so I think that's where we also go back to, like, what's the cadence that you guys want to see the FMP, right? Because technically you approved middle school project, and for us to move forward with those steps when you approve the FMP. And so that's for us, like, that's our clock to say, okay, now that's activated, we're moving ahead with those steps. And then the process for that has been then they travel through Appendix 9. So as you guys approve the FMP, then that's basically greenlighting us to take those timelines and put them into action. And then those action steps happen through Appendix 9. And so if there's going to be, like when Director Finch is talking about something new, well, when is it new? At step 2, would you want to see it? And then is there like a dollar threshold you want to consider? Because you probably don't want to see a parking lot, right, in step 2 the first time you've seen it, but it's part of FMP 2.0. You've given authorization for that project because it's technically embedded into that. And so then again, what are in the middle school is kind of an obvious one, right? That would be an easy one to say, okay, well, yeah, that might be something, but there's maybe some others that are a little bit less clear. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about just as far as coaching the team, about, okay, what's going to be our process on this? Just not so it's by the time it gets to Chase or I, we're saying, oh, shoot, that should have been pulled out to another. Because these guys are moving it along, right, in the process. And, we're not always aware what timeline they're going to then send it up to us to even be on a board agenda.
Some of it's historical too, like historically, transitional housing has been a separate line item. It's been a separate line item in both FMP 1 and 2. And so not necessarily attached to any given project. It's when we needed transitional housing, we would tap into that budget line like we did for Southeast, okay? So it's not really part of the Southeast project. It's a separate standalone. And if you don't point it out, I get how you could be misinterpreted as part of that project when in fact it's because of that project, but not necessarily attached to it. Make sense?
Yeah, and I like Superintendent Binger's idea of setting like a dollar amount. I think that would be.
Yeah, and that's an FMP2 as well, or, it's there, but again, we don't always go out of our way to point it out, I guess.
What's there, Dwayne, though? Like the dollar amount?
There's
Like-
$1 million in there for transitional housing in FMP 2.0.
No, not specific to transitional housing. Would be like, say a project's over $5 million
Oh,
or something like that. What would be a reasonable threshold, maybe just as we kick around an idea to say, like, what's a major enough project? We'd say, hey, if it tips this amount, we're going to pull that off when it hits maybe the first step of.
Yeah, the policy says
step
$1
two.
million, anything over $1 million.
But
But
you guys aren't going to want to see everything over $1 million, I don't think. That's going to be a couple of classrooms.
Standalone.
I don't know what over $1 million looks like.
well,
I know.
it's pretty easy spending $1 million.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I think we don't know what.
It's like, we just got, last year we did Gardner, Front Entrance, Weber, those are all 1.1. So that's roughly where it's at.
Okay.
You
So,
know.
are we talking about when we approved the plans for phase 2 of the Center for Innovation, that was not over $1 million, but then if you're talking about
Plans for what, Jane? Sorry, I missed the.
the phase 2 for Center for Innovation.
Okay.
There's several steps there, so are we talking about the step, or are we talking about the whole project?
And that'll be the challenge with the.
Yeah.
Because a piece of it might not reach the $1 million, but the whole thing may, right? The budget item. Jason and I are just talking. The step 2 is probably the critical one. Is just knowing again when do you want. If we're going to pull things out when it hits step 2, which is right after. So you've approved the big FMP 2.0, and then the first time something would come to you would be that authorization to begin designing the project, right? Well, that's where I went to the dollar threshold. Is there certain items you'd want to see pulled out that when they hit that number 2 step? And is there a dollar amount we'd want to say there, or maybe a total project cost, where we'd say, okay, if the total project cost is going to go above $1 million, we want to see step 2 pulled out. And then after step 2, and we've had that public part of it, then everything else can go back through the Appendix 9 process.
Typically, step 2 has been when we hired the architect or engineer to start the project. That's when it becomes real.
Right.
And so that's a good time to do as he just suggested.
Yeah. Okay, that and the total project.
So could,
As you said.
how does the staff put a project step specifically for approval on the agenda? How that would help us to do what we're supposed to be doing better?
I'm not sure it's going to help us do anything better as a group or as a district. I think that the problem it's trying to solve is that it's providing a different layer of awareness or accountability or transparency to the public, right? That it's not just bunched into Appendix 9, that it says, okay, if we're going to go out and design a large new middle school additions, that we've pulled that out as a separate action item to give people a different level of awareness that this is on the agenda, the board will be talking about this, and they're going to approve that authorization to begin project design, And then after that kind of public display, then all of the subsequent steps could be put back through Appendix 9 process. So I think it's really just a, maybe another layer of transparency, Charlie, because of so many things that are happening in Appendix 9 that it kind of pulls it out, makes it stand by itself.
So, am I hearing you say that the staff could do this fairly easily, as long as we know what the quantitative measure is?
That's not an issue.
Just tell us what you need, and we can adjust any way you need us to.
Well, and I don't, I'm not sure about pulling it out, making it an action item, but what if on that front page, could we just list projects over $1 million, just to draw attention to it? I don't know if we have to vote on everything, we're gonna vote on every front entrance and because I'm sure at some point that's gonna slow down the work if you gotta wait 2 weeks for a board meeting. But I think if we just, on that front page where it lists let's just say $1 million, I don't know if that's it, but some trigger point where then they're listed there. So then if we want to, we could dig in and say, oh, that front entrance, 1.2 million, let me look at that closer. Does that make sense?
But I don't see the harm in also, with a big project, putting it as a line item on the consent agenda. I don't think that slows things down.
Oh, on consent, sure, right, yeah,
Yeah.
good point. Well, then my question would be how big? What is the?
Yeah, I think that's what we need to
Yeah.
decide.
And that might be something we could talk some more about and then come back with the recommendation on too.
Yeah.
These guys will have, better number sense about, okay, what would be the right scope of that, where you're not necessarily seeing every authorization to be in project design pulled out for smaller items, but there could be a dollar or a total project threshold. I think we keep on that total project, so, because design work probably won't reach that, any kind of a dollar threshold, but the total project could.
On the smaller projects, we do tend to compress the design work.
Yeah.
Schematic design, design development, even construction documents on a parking lot, do you really care? So we kind of combine those items, but it's the big projects that you want to kind of follow track the progress. And the schematic designs, when we always had the presentations, because the public can appreciate what they're seeing, what the design work's gonna be.
And I think, anytime you have I guess that's the money, but then, like playgrounds get a lot of attention. Some of these
Yeah.
things that are directly impacted, maybe people do want to see what a front entrance is gonna look like, just for public interest in it and curiosity, but, I don't know.
Yeah,
Well, normally-
I just want to make sure that there's something that is new, that's big, a big dollar amount, that the public has the opportunity to ask questions about it.
No, I get that. I
Yeah.
think the thing I wanted to make sure we'd have some alignment on is like what step in the process, and want you guys to understand those steps, right? Because I wouldn't necessarily, I think at different time, like we've had some other bigger projects, maybe we haven't pulled out at the beginning of that design stage, but we've brought it back when there's actually a design for you to react to, right? And so if we're gonna say step 2 is when we bring it out, authorization to be in design, that would also just create a natural opportunity for the board to say, hey, we want to see this design when we come back. And that we could agenda something at that point too, and we've done that informally. But if we know that the standard is we're always going to go there, then that gives us something to work from.
I think that one of the things we have to work through is, I think there are some projects where we combine step 2 with other steps.
That's
right?
kind of what Dwayne was talking about, those compressed ones, right?
Right, but even on some big ones, we combine them sometimes.
It depends on how long it takes to design the project. If
Okay.
it's a short design, we know we go to a certain design, a certain design firm, and we know that MMS always designs our playground, so we can put them all together that way.
That one
We
would
can
go
always break
quicker.
them out if we need to.
We haven't done that on the really big
Yeah.
projects.
It's just it's usually the Pebble projects that we do those on.
The other thing, and why I'm asking that question is because, we're building schools, we normally talk lead time of at least 18 months. And so that's one thing that, especially when we combine the steps, that Appendix 9 helps us do. And so it just helps us time it out better in that. So again, I don't think it's a problem. It's just making sure that we can stay on that timing. The other thing I would say is that I like step 1 because it gives us the board's kind of initial blessing on these are the things we want you to tackle, but I think we need to do some better job on clarifying that too. Some of you probably remember a couple years ago we had a discussion where there was a little bit of confusion on that, and that was probably some miscommunication on our part where we presented FNP 2.0. The board very graciously approved it, and so we started moving some things forward. And all of a sudden, a single item came back to the board, and there was some concern of like, wait a second, I never supported that. And we're like, well, actually, yes, you did. And so I think us just being, when we provide those updates, being more clear about here are the major pieces, and board, as you know, by approving this, you know, you're kind of giving us the green light to go forward with these projects, and then we'll bring them back at these different checkpoints, because then it makes it real also. It doesn't just make it, hey, here's our strategic plan for the next 5 years. These are actually where we're going to start putting resources and putting some time and energy.
And what you're describing, Chase, is one of the most difficult things. One of the difficult things I've had to deal with as a board member is realizing what I've already agreed to.
Well said.
Well,
Yeah. Well said for that, yeah.
I'm not sure who's supposed to speak next.
Well,
You have things to add to the list, now's the time.
I do want to comment just for all of us. To me, the elements of, or the people participating in the design process, I think should not include me. I was elected to be on the board, was not elected to design elementary schools. That's Brady's work, the Chase's work, Superintendent's work, Jeff, everyone else's work. Frankly, I'm not really sure it's the community's work. Having an idea, knowing what we're planning on doing, that's fine. We can do that. Having a group of teachers tell us this is the wrong design for this classroom, that's fine. Having a group of parents tell us we don't like this design for this classroom, I'm really keen on that.
I don't know,
I'm
I think,
not micromanaging here. No, we're talking about whether or not to do a big project. So we're not talking about how
Right.
to do it.
And that's, to me, the FFU approval process is passed up.
I don't know, I think that the community still has an interest in ensuring that we're not approving ostentatious designs, not saying that we are, but if we're just building a tower to build a tower because it's pretty, I think the community should have some kind of input in that. Not saying that we're building towers, but
Yeah, and I think we mitigate that concern through the actual design work about the stakeholders that are involved and participate in that. So I think we have, good experience with that. So I understand the concern, Charlie, but I also think we have a good process for that. I think this concern is just about making sure that, we approved an FMP 2 or 3 years ago. Now, how do we make sure we're updating folks along the way when we're ready to activate a project, right? And your opinions could have shifted also by that point, right? I mean, you might be in a different spot about a piece of the FMP 2 years later than you were when you took that vote, right?
and if we need new board members.
it could be new people that didn't approve that. And so I think that's reasonable and it's a good step to put in there. And it doesn't also encumber us, with a lot of additional steps moving forward. If we get some consensus on the beginning of the design and we know that that's the will of the board to keep moving with that, then again, we can embed those back into Appendix 9 and keep it moving. But it just gives us a check or kind of notice to the community, hey, we're taking on this project now. So we'll talk some more about the maybe total project cost number and try to come back here with, a recommendation that we'd like to probably, maybe it might make the most sense to just bring the policy back then to P&G with the update from that point instead of another operations meeting, that we just suggest a couple edits to this policy, bring it back to P&G, and then we can look for your approval of that or support.
It might help to have an example, like here's an example of a project that we might want to put in consent. And then also that front page, I do think,
Yeah, I
if
put
there's,
that down. That's not
just an
right.
example, this is what it would look like, so we can then decide, oh, I don't need to read through all 50 pages, but I do want to check out that, maybe it is a parking lot or fence. Because, and this, I appreciate that we're more transparent than we have to be by law. That's a good thing. I think in the past I have heard perhaps a board member say we should have one elementary school design and they're all built like that across the board. Like sometimes people come in with ideas like that are more micromanaging. They don't have your same appreciation for professional staff, and they have their own ideas about real specific things that maybe to the professionals don't make a lot of sense.
Do they have 4 votes?
Charlie.
You never know. It's an election, you never know what happens in the town.
You know how many times that one design's been pitched to me over the years and it doesn't work?
Well, yeah,
There's
there's
too many site variance differences.
soil,
But
geography.
one comment I do want to make, and I remember, I just thought of Ruthina, when Ruthina first came on the board, we spent an hour or two, you and Superintendent Murley and I, and we went through yeah. And I remember, well, we went through the facility master plan, and she grilled me, you know, what are we doing here and here and there? But to Director Lingo's point, maybe we need to get back to that, where we spend some time at the beginning when you come in, so you know what's coming down the road. Because frankly, when the freight train leaves the station and Jeff and I are the engineers, it's moving pretty quick. You know, we just keep it moving so we can get them done. So,
And how many new members are there since the facilities master plan 2.0 was approved?
oh, 2.0?
The last approval was an update, I think, in August of '22.
Is that just you two? Yeah, I
But I
think.
think Dwayne's idea is
Yeah.
good, that when you're first on the board, to get sort of a deep dive, because I know when I first got on, I was drilling less about the utility bills. Like, why are they different? You know, because and now you can just skim through that stuff, as you know, but once you get on, you really,
Yeah.
the fire hose is coming at you pretty quick.
And I'm on my soapbox, but the district has done a really good job including stakeholders in the design. And then in the end, it was always our responsibility in physical plan to say, we gotta rope it in a little bit, we can't afford all that stuff, you know? And we've done value engineering more than once, where we've kind of redesigned, and you've been through it, Eliza. You know, you want all this, but we can't afford it, so we have to come up with the best solution. But the point is, her staff had input, she had input, you know, the departments. And back when we did Liberty High School, we had all kinds of people from the other high schools that had input into it, so it's a good process.
Yeah, another example is, I remember a meeting, it was a couple of years ago, with the design of Northwest, right? And we pulled that presentation out of Appendix 9 and gave that, it was a wonderful presentation. We all got to learn what the design was, but it wasn't on the agenda, right? So, and people didn't even know no, it wasn't.
Yeah, we
It
asked
was
to
in
pull it so we
Appendix
could
9,
present it, yeah.
And so, because I didn't even know that presentation was going to happen, I was happy that it did. But then, you know, a year later, we get parents who are like, well, wait, this didn't happen, and you know, how come I didn't know this was going to happen? And I would have liked to been able to point to, hey, it was on the agenda, but I couldn't, because it wasn't on the agenda. It was we pulled that from Appendix 9 to have that presentation. So that's the kind of thing that I want to avoid. I just want to make sure that the public, you know, is aware of everything that's happening. But if they have something they want to say, that they have an opportunity to say it.
I know.
Well, I like this one because
Yeah.
then at step 2 now you would know, hey, we're going to go design the middle schools, right? We're looking for your support there to begin that design work. And then when we're pulling that step 2 out, you could say, hey, and when that's done, we want to see this one back, right? And then that kind of eliminates the subjectivity after that. So we'll have a standard process about when, you know, for step 2, we're going to pull those out. We'll look at a total project cost number. And then at that point, the board can say, hey, when that design work's complete, we'd like to see that one come back in a presentation, right? And that's easy enough to then agenda and put there, so.
The small piece to that is that we have never, since 2012 anyway, put the floor plans on the website. And we do that to protect our staff and our students against those who might do harm. So
Yeah,
that, we just don't, and we're reluctant to even attach it to a board item for that reason.
Yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable adding to it.
Yeah.
To circle back, I think to JP's point, if we're gonna do some policy changes through P&G, didn't we do a new policy last year on new board member orientation? And maybe we could add as a bullet point to that policy of like the things that you do when you get orientated, familiarization, whatever, with the current facilities master plan. Because I would think if you're a new board member, one of the first things you would do is go to the policy that says, all right, what am I supposed to do now? And then you can see it as a bullet point and know to yourself, oh, I should reach out to the superintendent or someone to see how I get this done. And then they could sit down for 2 hours with Dwayne or Jeff or whoever is there at the time.
No problem.
But if we're going to amend policy, maybe that's one that we could also put on the list too.
That's a good idea.
Noted that.
I mean, these are fun things, right? Building new or renovating for our students is those are things that we like to talk about. You all heard Dwayne, right? We have to cut him off every meeting because it's passion, right? And so those are things we like to do.
Sorry.
You take shots at me all the time,
Yeah.
Dwayne. This isn't a bad thing for us. I think it's just knowing when we can do it so we can do it consistently. And I think that's what I'm hearing is that if the community knows it's always going to come at step 2, or it's always going to come right after the public hearing at step 6, and we can just make sure that people know that's what to look for. And then our team knows what to look for, and we know what to prepare along the way as part of the process and what we present.
Anything else on appendix 9? No? So the next operations committee meeting then, is the other thing on the agenda. When is that?
Well, looking here, I think we're gonna actually
It's that
still
time
wanna
of
do
year.
it in June. Sometimes we've held off on committee meetings during the summer, but as we've talked about some things with FMP 2.0 and then also elementary school configuration conversation, kind of the continuation of some of that we got into this winter and spring. I do think we'll probably want to schedule one for June, and at that, I think you and I had talked about that's when we'd kind of like to do a general overview of FMP 2.0, but we could also do that at a potentially regular meeting, but it might make more sense in a committee just from a conversation standpoint and having some more time to informally look at some different ideas that we might have now, knowing we've been having to take a couple new schools off of the planning, and what would we want to use with those dollars for instead. So it could be a little bit of a brainstorming session, I guess, is what I'm trying to spit out. So to answer your original question, I think you are going to want one for June, which would be what, Kim?
The
The 11th.
I won't be here on the 11th, that much. Family trip.
Summers get like that. And then I'm sure we'll all be interested in Southeast too, and how that's going to, just like, just want to know.
Yeah, we'll have some more tonight for you during the regular meeting, so yeah.
Chase asked me today, I said, maybe yes, maybe no. I gave him a real warm, fuzzy feeling.
Or Dwayne will just tell you right now. Yeah.
All right.
All right, well, with that, I guess I take a motion to adjourn.
I know. Yeah.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Thank you, guys.